everyone, welcome back to the channel. Ultra short throw projectors have become nearly as common as soundbars these days. Just about every brand makes one, and it feels like there's a new model right around the corner. But one UST that's managed to stay in the conversation is Epson's LS800. That projector came out almost 3 years ago, and it still holds its own, mainly because of how bright it is and how well it performs for gaming. But as good as the LS800 is, it definitely had its weak spots. The biggest one? Its operating system, especially when it came to image adjustments and calibration controls. With Epson recently introducing their new long throw Q series projectors, it was only a matter of time before their ultra short throw lineup received a refresh as well. That brings us to the new QS100. It's the only ultra short throw model in Epson's Q series, and it seems like Epson's trying to address some of the gaps the LS800 left behind. When you look at the QS100 and LS800 side by side, you'd be hard-pressed to spot any real difference. The design is almost identical, except for one change. Epson added a new aluminum panel to the top of the QS100. Aside from that, they're nearly the same visually. The QS100 comes in two finishes, white or black. Both versions keep the dark gray fabric grille along the front with that subtle gold accent strip underneath. Now here's something different. Unlike the LS800, the QS100 no longer includes the built-in Yamaha 2.1 channel speaker system. I asked Epson about this, and their answer was pretty straightforward. Most customers just weren't using the built-in speakers. In terms of size, the QS100 measures about 27.4 inches wide, 13.4 inches deep, and just over 6 inches tall. It weighs around 27 pounds. That's a little larger than some of the other UST projectors out there, but it's still easy enough to move around during setup. And if you're planning to wall mount it above your screen, that's still an option. Epson's wall mount is compatible just like it was with the LS800. Around the side of the QS100, you'll find all the usual ports hidden behind a removable panel. So once you have it all wired up, you can pop the cover back on and the projector maintains a clean look. There are two HDMI 2.0 ports, with one of them supporting eARC, plus two USB 2.0 ports and a USB Type-B for firmware updates. You also get an Ethernet LAN port and an RS-232C port for control systems. Toward the front, right next to those connections, there's a simple control pad with directional buttons along with power, home, and input selection buttons. Just underneath that, you'll find a manual focus slider. The remote that comes with the QS100 is basically the same one Epson includes with its other Q series projectors. It's a little bulky, but you do get more functionality compared to the one that shipped with the LS800. Epson added shortcut buttons for quick access to HDR settings, color adjustments, and brightness controls, which really cuts down on the time spent digging through menus just to make small tweaks. You probably won't use the Epson remote all that much once everything's dialed in. Since the QS100 supports HDMI CEC, I was able to control it with remotes from devices like Apple TV and Fire Stick 4K. Power, volume, and input switching all worked fine. I still reached for the Epson remote when I needed to make calibration changes, but for day-to-day use, sticking with your streaming remote works just fine. While the QS100 and LS800 might look nearly identical at first glance, there are some key differences beneath the surface. Starting with the brightness, Epson has boosted the output from the LS800's 4000 ANSI lumens to an even brighter 4500 ANSI lumens. To get there, they've moved from a 4-in-1 laser module to a new 5-in-1 design while still sticking with Epson's proven 3LCD technology. If you're not familiar, 3LCD uses 3 individual LCD chips, one each for red, green, and blue, to display the full color spectrum all at once. That tends to help with more accurate color and fewer rainbow artifacts compared to single-chip DLP systems. Just like the LS800, the QS100 uses a laser light source that's rated for around 20,000 hours. One of the more meaningful upgrades is the new 32-bit QZX processor. This is the same chip Epson uses across its entire Q series, and it brings a handful of image quality improvements, like better noise reduction, smoother motion handling, and improved dynamic tone mapping for HDR content. One of the biggest limitations of the LS800, especially for custom integrators and enthusiasts, was how little control you had over image calibration. When I tested it a couple years ago, the out-of-the-box accuracy was solid. Grayscale and color were decent, but if you wanted to fine-tune anything beyond the basics, anything beyond contrast, brightness, or saturation, you were out of luck. That's no longer the case with the QS100. Epson has finally added ISF custom calibration controls, giving you access to gamma settings, full grayscale tuning, and a complete color management system. It's a pretty big step forward if you want to dial in the image. The menu system also got an update to match Epson's other Q series projectors, and now even includes panel alignment, something the LS800 didn't offer at all. Another change Epson made this year was removing the built-in Android-based smart system that came with the LS800. And honestly, I don't think that's a bad thing. I usually recommend pairing any projector with a dedicated streaming device anyways, whether that's an Apple TV, a Fire Stick, or even a Shield. Most built-in systems are underpowered or out of date within a year or two anyways. That said, if having built-in streaming apps is a must-have for you, it's something to keep in mind. One upside of ditching the smart OS is speed. The QS100 boots up much faster than the LS800. In standard mode, it powers on in about 23 seconds. There's also a quick start mode that cuts that down to roughly 10 seconds. Setting up the Epson QS100 is pretty straightforward. It uses manual focus and includes Epson's geometry correction wizard, which gives you a couple of different setup options depending on how you plan to install it. You can calibrate for either a screen or a plain wall, or even use the Epson Setup Assistant app. Now, I was a little skeptical about how well the app would work, but honestly, it did a decent job. You just use your phone's camera to photograph the projected image, and the app auto-adjusts the geometry. I still had to touch up the corners manually, but it definitely got me most of the way there and saved some time doing it. If you prefer doing things the old school way, you still have access to the standard 18-point adjustment grid for more precise control. For this review, I tested the QS100 with a 120-inch Epson Silverflex ALR screen in a fairly bright living room, sitting about 10 feet back. The projector has 4 color modes: Cinema, Natural, Dynamic, and Vivid. Out of the box, Natural mode was the most accurate with a grayscale delta E of around 4.8. But for most of my testing, I ended up sticking with Cinema. The Dynamic setting added a pretty noticeable brightness boost, which came in handy during the day, though it was a bit too bright for darker content. I spent several days watching a mix of sports and HDR movies with the lights both on and off. And the first thing that stood out, just how bright the Epson QS100 really is. After calibration, I measured 3,348 ANSI lumens in natural mode and 4,412 lumens in dynamic mode. That's a noticeable jump from what I measured on the LS800, and that model was already bright. Fan noise is another area worth mentioning. In normal mode, I measured around 38 decibels, which you can hear in a quiet room. Medium drops that down to around 27 decibels, which is less noticeable once content is playing. Quiet mode brings it all the way down to 20 decibels, and at that point, it's basically silent during playback. Even though the QS100 doesn't support Dolby Vision or HDR10+, its tone mapping still holds its own. Epson keeps things simple here with an on-off toggle for tone mapping with no way to manually tweak it. You can disable dynamic tone mapping and use static tone mapping instead, which allows you to manually adjust the HDR10 slider. The scale runs from 1 as the brightest to 16 as the darkest. What I found with this approach though is what looks perfect in one scene might end up being blown out in another. Dynamic tone mapping on the QS100 handled highlights well. I didn't notice any major clipping, and detail in brighter scenes was generally preserved. You can also turn on something called adaptive gamma, which bumps up overall image brightness. But once I pushed it past level 2, black levels started to lift a bit more than I'd like. Color reproduction on the QS100 feels dialed in for most content. It covers just over 86% of the DCI-P3 color space. The color accuracy was good, and I didn't notice any major issues while watching. And because it uses Epson's 3 LCD system, there's basically no RBE, rainbow effect. That's a huge plus, especially if you're sensitive to it. Even though this isn't a native 4K projector, the upscaling here is solid. On a 120-inch screen from about 10 feet away, the image looked clean and sharp enough that it didn't feel like I was missing anything in terms of resolution. I did tweak sharpness and enable super resolution, which helps pull a bit more fine detail without making things look overly processed. One thing I appreciated was how evenly focused the image was across the whole screen, no soft corners or blurred edges. When it comes to motion, the QS100 includes Epson's frame interpolation feature, which you can turn on to help smooth out fast movement or wide camera pans. Personally, I usually keep this off to avoid that soap opera effect, but in this case, the low setting actually worked pretty well. It helped smooth out 24 frame content without making things look too artificial. Anything higher than low started to feel a bit too processed, but for general action scenes or for sports, the low setting struck a nice balance. I've seen a few comments floating around about Epson removing features from the LS800 for this new model. I'll admit, I was a bit skeptical at first too, but after spending time with the QS100, it's a nice upgrade, especially when it comes to brightness, tone mapping, and the level of control it gives you for calibration. Epson clearly listened to feedback and addressed a lot of what people wanted changed. With so many ultra short throw projectors available, Epson needed to offer something that stood out. The QS100 does just that with its improved picture quality, earning it an AVSForum top choice for 2025. Thanks for watching. If you found this review helpful, give it a thumbs up, consider subscribing for more home theater and projector reviews, and I'll see you in the next one.